Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Informed in Five. Today's guest is Ron K. Kaufman. He is the keynote speaker for the 2022 Creating Your Own Path Autism Conference, and he joins me today to share his personal story, as well as discuss information about his keynote address and breakout session topics at the conference. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ron.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we can get started with you. Telling me a little bit more about yourself and your story.
Sure. Well, so first, let me just start with professionally, I've been doing this. I've been in the field and working with families, children, and adults with autism and educators from all over the world, Asia, Europe, the United States. And I've been doing that for about 25 years professionally. And it's been my absolute pleasure. I'm also the author of a book called Autism Breakthrough. My name is, of course, Raun Kaufman. And I'm so excited to be talking at the conference. So excited to be going to Mississippi. It's going to be really wonderful. But I also have a very personal connection to this field as well, which is that at a young age, I was diagnosed with so-called severe autism. And when I say severe, I mean I had no language. I had no eye contact. I would spend hours and hours every day doing, what a lot of you probably call stims. I would rock back and forth, move my fingers in front of my face. One of my favorite things to do is to take a kitchen plate and get on the ground and spin it like a top over and over again while I would flap my hands. I would do this for hours and hours. Believe it or not, they actually told my parents I had a tested IQ below 30, and that really, this was what they were seeing was how I was going to look for the rest of my life. That I wasn't going to be able to speak or communicate or certainly go to a regular school or even really have friends. They actually said at one point he's never going to prefer people over objects. And long term, he's not going to go to university, live on his own, fall in love, get married. These things are just not in the cards for your son. And they did something really amazing, my parents. They really gave me a chance when nobody else did. They believed in me when no one else did. And they were willing to take some really different approaches toward reaching me. Really interesting because this is actually some of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm not going to be focusing on my story at the conference, but some of what I'm going to be talking about is this tendency that a lot of us have with our loved ones on the spectrum to come at things from the outside. We look at them as a neurotypical person. We look at them. What do they need to improve in? What do they need to change? What behaviors do we need to tamp down on? And that's an outsider's perspective. It's a well-intentioned perspective, but it's coming from the outside. And I'm going to talk a bit about the importance of coming from the inside, coming from the actual child or adult's lived experience, how they're perceiving things, how they're feeling about things, what things feel like to them, why they're actually doing what they're doing, why they're feeling the need to do certain things. And my parents came at me with this perspective as well. They actually really focused on connecting with me in my own world first before trying to entice me out of it. Actually, one of the first things my mom did with me was to sit down next to me, take one of those plates and spin with me. And that was actually, she was kind of communicating with me on my level and creating a relationship with me around this interest instead of trying to, what she was told to do, take the plate away, stop him, show him it's inappropriate, redirect him to something else, right? So this is, anyway, my parents worked with me for over 3 years, and I blossomed and grew in different ways. And ultimately I'm this guy you see in front of you. But really, I have to say, I went on to do every single thing that my parents were promised up and down that I just wouldn't be able to do. I ended up graduating from the Ivy League's Brown University with a degree in biomedical ethics. Certainly not supposed to be in the cards for me. Travel around the world, doing lectures, workshops, interviews, different things like that. Yes, I am married to actually a really wonderful woman named Dilma, who is my amazing wife and best friend. And all of these things were just never supposed to happen for me. So I think it really gave me a perspective of, I have a lived experience that are the people we're trying to help have on the one hand, but on the other hand, also this sense of a real cherishing of what it means to be on the spectrum, a real celebration of that, and a sense that, I really, really want to encourage people not to try and decide in advance what someone on the spectrum is or isn't capable of. There's no reason and no benefit to trying to play God and make these kind of decisions when you're dealing with a 2-year-old, 5-year-old, even a 25-year-old. What we see and what's happening right now doesn't actually tell us a lot about what's going to be 5 years from now. We think it does. We try and make these assessments. There's a lot of parents still that I work with that get told, "Oh, I just had this happen. She had two-year-olds, and she was told, yeah, start looking for a group home. Put them. They're not going to really be able to do anything." And I just feel like, how can we know? How can we know that, right? It's not that it's not okay if someone on the spectrum ends up, not ending up where I ended up. It's more that we don't want to be the ones deciding that. Let's let the child or adult get all their shots, try to get where they want to get. And then, yeah, there may be things that are challenging for them. There may be things maybe that they don't even end up doing, but at least we weren't the ones that were holding them back. And so, yeah, so I'm really grateful for that experience that I've had, and it's really informed a lot of my professional experience.
And at what point in your life did you kind of realize that this was the path you wanted to be on with speaking and writing books and being where you are now?
I have to tell you, I was pretty darn sure that this was not going to be my path for most of my life. It wasn't like growing up, I was like, I want to go and help people on the spectrum. I was more like, hey, that's my parents' thing. I'm going to go in my own direction. And it wasn't until, let's see, it was well after I graduated college. Even when I was in college, this was not the direction I thought I was going to go. And then, yeah, I guess my mid-20s, I started really thinking about this, of combination of what my parents had done for me, what's going on with other people on the spectrum, how I might be able to be of service in that way. And actually, I was living in Southern California at the time, and I literally stopped what I was doing. I got in my car. I drove all the way to Massachusetts because I was like, I think I can be of help here. So that's what I did.
That's awesome. Can you tell me through from the beginning to where you are now? Is there a moment that stands out to you more than something, whether it's some person you've met or a place that you've been? What has been one of like your biggest, best memories over these past few years?
Gosh, there's so many to choose from. I mean, because I've had sort of phases. Like when I first got back to Massachusetts, I was in training, obviously, in helping people on the spectrum. I was working with the Autism Treatment Center of America, a nonprofit organization in Massachusetts. Did that for a long, long time. So I have great memories of the training part, the great memories of working with people. It's been amazing. But you know, I would say it's so funny because I'll just tell, I had an experience recently where I was actually talking with a 24-year-old on the spectrum, and he had felt that he was being had been, not what wasn't at the moment, but had been in his past, been bullied and been treated in ways that um, that he didn't like, and that felt traumatizing to him, right? And it's really interesting because one of the things that I was talking about with his parents, and I thought was really important, love him dearly, but they were, trying to get him to be different in different ways. Can you not complain? Can you not do this? Can you not repeat the same question over and over again? Can you be willing to start to look for a job? All these, because he's living with them, right? And communicate verbally, so we're able to have Zoom conversations that we've been having regular sessions every week, actually. And he is I'm telling you this because one of the things I was trying to communicate with the parents is, listen, I want to help him grow and be able to do more things that he might want to do also, just like you do. But we can't even look at that until he feels truly safe first. This is a big thing that I feel like gets skipped over when we're trying to help people on the spectrum, is they have to feel safe first before any teachings happen, before any growth is happening, before encouraging different kinds of behaviors or skills happens. They must feel safe first. Otherwise, what we're going to end up doing is kind of unintentionally kind of re-traumatizing them, and actually we then are going to get met with lots of resistance, right? Even if we're coming from a really good intention, as of course we are, because they're not feeling safe. They're not, there's a trust deficit. They're not trusting us. They're feeling kind of defensive and even sensory defensive as well, because sensory issues going on. And then we're coming in and trying to say, learn this, be this way, pay attention to me, give me some eye contact, do this. It's incredibly counterproductive. Again, I'm not beating up on anybody. Everyone's working really hard trying to help these kids and adults, and I really get that. But I think there's this missing piece here. And anyway, so I haven't even gotten to the actual event. So I'm working with this guy, and he it was so cool. At one point, uh, he said something. He asked me a question. He asked me really good questions, and he goes, "Why do people laugh at things that I say?" Or said something like that. And I had just laughed at something that he said. Right now, I love talking to this guy, and I love being with him. It's like my absolute pleasure. And so I do laugh at different things he says, because I'm like, oh, like I love, oh, that's so clever. Or, oh, I've never been asked that question before. Or, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or, oh, or sometimes I'll laugh because I'll be like, oh my gosh, that's a thing so many people struggle with. You're not alone in that. But I'll laugh because I'm kind of noticing that with him, right? So he asked me that, and I say, oh, why do you ask? And he talks about how different times throughout his life people have laughed at him in a way that he felt was like bullying and not nice, and a sort of a statement. So I say, and we had talked, I knew that already. We had talked about that. And I said, oh, hey, how do how is it when I laugh at you? Are you feeling like you don't like that? Are you feeling like, and he just goes, no, he goes, it's different with you. And he's like, I feel good with you. I feel safe with you. I like when you laugh at that. Like, and it was sort of deeply touching to me, because it was like we had this connection, and uh we had this connection, and it was kind of like it really elucidated to me yet again that our loved ones, it really matters how we are with them, not just what we teach, how often the session is, what goals we've set. I'm not talking about that, but actually just how we are. What is our emotional frequency, our emotional state when we're with them? How are we talking to them? One of the things I do with him is every single time I talk to him, 100% of the time, the first thing he tells me is he's tired and he's bored. Now, I've talked to him probably 30 times. That's what he says at the beginning of every conversation. So I don't say, oh, you don't have to be tired and bored, or, oh, you didn't do this, that if you did this more, you wouldn't feel that way, or, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's terrible. None of that. I always go, hey, thank you so much for telling me that. Actually really helps me to know what's going on for you, how you feel. And so again, it meant something to me that was all reaching him, even though it could look like to an outsider, well, is it reaching him? He's still saying the same darn thing every time you greet him. But to me, it's like, no, there's something deeper. He feels the need to say that, and maybe he's feeling that, but he's also feeling like that's welcomed by me, that kind of connection. So yeah, it was very meaningful to me. That was actually pretty recently that happened, a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and I can relate to that with just that human connection, and that no matter a person, everyone is the same, in the sense that we all have emotions, and that can be the one key thing that connects us. And I think that's awesome that you speak on that, just personally, just with I told you a little bit about my daughter, just how um that's always the way that we communicate. That's like our language, is through that connection, that love, just like an embrace, and just connecting. And I think that's so important to break down, and just always realize, that everyone has emotions, and that even if they're not expressing them the way that you or I might do, that their emotions are still valid. So that's what I try to tell everybody. It's just like, you know, especially with my daughters, like, if she's got something's going on, and we're just having to figure it out based off of like the reaction, and everybody has reactions to different things. So yeah,
Sure.
just personally, just thank you for sharing that. But
If you don't mind, that actually reminds me of something, which is one of the areas, one of the key areas I'm going to be talking about at the conference, right? So I have the sort of main keynote address I'm doing, then I also have a breakout session. But in the main keynote address, I'm going to be talking about something called neurocrashes, and this is, I got to tell you, since me and my colleague Kate C. Wild, we kind of coined this term and developed a lot of things around that. But it's been amazing because since we've kind of coined it, it kind of caught wildfire. Just to like give you an idea, there's an organization called the U.S. Autism Association that did a whole one-day conference just about neurocrashes, right? As an example, after we were developing that, they also there was an article in Psychology Today, the magazine, not written by me, not written by my colleague Kate, but all about that, and saying like there's this term and this sort of way of seeing things that Raun and Kate developed that I think is applicable in so many of these situations. In the article, that's what they were saying. So I want to talk about this a little bit because it's, I was actually discussing it with my sister the other day, and she said, "Oh wow, it's kind of like you guys are diagnosing something that hasn't been seen and understood or diagnosed yet." Because if you think about, right, if we go way back, right, people thought people having epileptic seizures were possessed, right? People thought people with dyslexia just had like severe learning disability and weren't even just comprehending things, even though this was just a processing issue, right? So there's a lot of times where we've thought things in the past, and then as we come to understand it and see it through a different lens, we understand, oh, so an epileptic seizure is actually, in a sense, an electrical storm in the brain. And that's what's actually happening. Oh, gives us a whole new way to greet it. And that's what a neurocrash is. So just to define it, it's actually when the environment or circumstance overwhelms the brain of the person on the spectrum so that their coping mechanisms shut down. Okay. Now it's really important because then that's what's happening on the inside. What then happens on the outside can look to us like, a meltdown, an extreme or explosive behavior, high anxiety, hitting, throwing things, screaming, swearing, different kinds of things like that can look. That's what looks like on the outside, on the surface. But what's on the inside is actually a neurocrash. It's not that these are either chosen behaviors or like a temper tantrum because they're just mad, they're not getting what they want, or they're trying to be difficult, or they're being obstinate and stubborn. That's really not what's happening. A big thing, I'm going to talk about this a lot at the conference, is we are blaming the wrong thing. We either blame the child or adult, like they're choosing it and they're kind of choosing to be difficult, and they know they're not supposed to do it and they do it anyway, right? Or sometimes I've seen it go the other way, and we're like, hey, look, this is what autism is. We got someone on the spectrum, and if you have someone on the spectrum, this is part of what it's going to be like. And I actually think both of those are misunderstandings of what's actually happening. First of all, I definitely don't think it's actually a part of autism. A lot of people with autism have neurocrashes for sure, but actually, if you don't have something that we call the imposed situation, which is basically that's basically the environment or circumstance that the person on the spectrum is exposed to, usually without their say so. And it builds up. There's coming from a bunch of different sources, which we can talk about a bit. But basically, all of this is coming at them. And not just sensory. Sensory is part of it, but it's not all of it. And all of this is coming at them. And if you actually reduce these imposed situations, you can still have someone who's in the same place on the autism spectrum, but you're not going to get these neurocrashes. You're not going to get the meltdowns. So it's not like an inherent part of being on the spectrum. And it's definitely not the person's fault. It's not like, again, these are not chosen behaviors like, I think I'm going to punch someone or break a window or start yelling swear words today. And let me consider that. Oh, yeah, I think I'm going to do that at 3:45 today, right? That's not what's happening, right? there's a buildup of things. And actually, I'll just touch on this really quickly because there's another thing I'm going to talk a bit about in the keynote is what I call the three main aspects of autism. And if you notice, I'll just list them real quick, but if you notice, none of them are behaviors, right? Yet, like I'm not going to mention common behavior, repetitive behaviors or avoidance of eye contact. It's not that people on the spectrum don't do those things, but again, those are symptoms of something. They're not actually the autism, right? In fact, a lot of what gets called autism is actually the person on the spectrum's reaction to the autism, not the autism itself. So the three main things which are underlying and are not behavioral in nature, they may lead to behaviors, is one, a kind of social, relational, emotional communication difference or challenge, what I often just shorten to like a social relational difference or social relational challenge. Then oftentimes the neurotypical people trying to help them, but they don't understand what's going on. So they kind of don't really meet them where they are. And then you get this trust deficit on the part of the person on the spectrum where they don't feel safe, they don't feel understood. And so when the people that are best equipped to help them, which might be us, we end up getting met with resistance, but not because they're being difficult, but because there's this trust deficit. So that's this first social relational issue going on. Then second is something that my colleague and I call S4, which stands for super sensitive sensory systems, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but basically this idea that a lot of things that may go unnoticed and may seem completely not a thing that we would even notice or focus on sensory wise are highly overloading and overwhelming for our loved ones. Right? It's easy to see that when there's a fire engine and they go like that because there's a siren. Okay, we can see that, right? But it's harder to see that there might be something, the sound of our shoes against this rubber soles against the floor, which we don't even notice, for some of our loved ones is already like a fire engine siren right in their ear, right? Or the feeling of just the clothes resting on their skin can feel like someone's scratching them all day. So what over time, this kind of shifts them into this fight or flight survival mode. And then that builds up over time and they hit something that I call their sensory wall, which basically is like the most amount of sensory input they can tolerate in that day. And then they will have a neuro crash when they hit the sensory wall. So that's number two. And then the third and final one I'll just say is, and this I feel like is the least understood by most people of the three, is a powerfully heightened need for predictability and control. Now, this is huge because the behavioral aspect of it, people often label it, they're being rigid, they're being inflexible, they're being demanding, right? But they're missing the actual thing underneath, which is there's a powerfully heightened need for this sense of predictability and control so that they can feel safe, so that they can like literally just breathe. And all throughout the day, unintentionally, but all throughout the day, we are violating and upending this need for control in little ways and in big ways throughout the day. We don't even notice all the different ways we're doing it. When we take something away from them, when we require them to sit at the table for dinner and they're not able to do that in a comfortable way, when we have them wear a shirt they don't want to wear, when we say it's time to leave and they're not ready to leave, when all different things. And none of these things are coming from a bad place, right? But what happens is that builds up also, and they hit something that I would call their control wall, also leads to neuro crashes. By the way, so those are the three main aspects, but I just want to add something to this too. It's so important. And it was relevant to that guy that I was working with that I was telling you about before, is that people say, oh, autism, mind blindness, people on the spectrum, they have mind blindness. And what's fascinating to me about this is I feel like the people I've worked with, and I've worked with thousands of different families, I actually don't find that people, whether they're verbal or not yet verbal on the spectrum, I don't find mind blindness. I actually kind of find anti-mind blindness. What I mean by that is, yes, I'm not saying people on the spectrum don't sometimes have difficulty in social situations, sure, or they might not understand sarcasm, sure, that can, of course. But actually, if you take mind blindness, which is they're just supposedly, they have no idea what other people are thinking or feeling, they have no theory of mind, no connection to that. I have to tell you, they are, to me, my experience, more attuned to the emotional state of the person around them than most neurotypical people. I can pretend I'm having a good day when I'm not, put a smile on my face, and I can fool most neurotypical people. I just say the right things. Oh, yeah, I'm having a good day, whatever. I've never been able to fool anyone on the spectrum that I've been around. Like I can put a smile on my face, but if underneath I'm stressed out, they pick up on that right away because it's leaking out in 100 different nonverbal ways that I can't control. And then, unfortunately, and that's cool, that's a fortunate thing, but the unfortunate part of that is that when our emotional frequency is disturbed, when we're basically emotionally agitated, that feels like a tsunami of more sensory overload for them. We don't realize this because it doesn't feel like it's not like a sound, like a sensory or a sight, but it can really overload their super sensitive sensory systems in the same way. And so regulating our own emotional frequency when we're around or helping someone on the spectrum is monumentally important. One of the things I'm going to talk about in that talk is I'm going to throw out, probably don't have time for it right now, but I'm going to throw out what I call the 5 turnaround tools of the ACT protocol. This is something that me and Kate Seawild developed. And ACT stands for Autism Crisis Turnaround. So it's basically, how do we prevent neurocrashes? How do we deal with that? Right? Instead of just, that's an inevitable thing. They have autism. They're going to have neurocrashes. That's life. Right? Actually, these are not inevitable. They're preventable. Right? And so I'm going to walk people through sort of what are the 5 ways that we can prevent that. And I won't list them for you right now, but I'll just say the first thing to be aware of, the first step, is to start to notice something called SOS. And that stands for, I know SOS is like a distress signal, right? But it also stands for, in this case, signals of stress. And these are not signals of a neurocrash, because you don't need signals of a neurocrash. It's an explode. You're going to notice that. They're more subtle things that start well before, an hour before a neurocrash, that are subtle. You got to notice it's changes in breathing. It's opening and closing hands. There's a bunch of them. I'm going to walk people through it. But the key is, not to notice that 60 seconds before the neurocrash, but to notice it 60 minutes before the neurocrash. That's when you can actually make changes to the environment that circumvents the neurocrash before it ever happens. And this is so key. I know there's going to be a lot of talk at the conference of transitions. It's a big theme. I'm going to be addressing that too, because people think it's just some inherent part of the transition that's the problem. And yes, our loved ones a lot of times have difficulty with transitions, no question about it. But it's not an inherent part of the transition. It's that if we can, okay, here's the thing. Let's say I'm going to just use this example. Let's say you have someone on the spectrum really doesn't like when another person in the room, maybe their little brother or something, cries or screams or whatever, right? And so when that happens, they have a neurocrash and they have an explosive reaction. Right? So we think, we gotta make sure they're not in the room when their sibling cries, or we gotta stop this, right? And yeah, it'd be great. I mean, I'm not advocating that you deliberately put them in the room, but what's interesting is, and I've seen this happen many times with my own eyes, is that actually, if you take these steps to tamp down these imposed situations, all the things that are coming together to build toward a neurocrash, what you're doing is, a neurocrash happens when there's no more bandwidth inside in the child or adult's nervous system and brain to sort of tolerate and process what's happening. So if there is bandwidth, if there is space for that, then they might not like something, but they're not going to have a neurocrash about it. So for instance, if you take that person who really reacts when their sibling cries, has a big explosion about it, when you take that, actually, if you address it in a more holistic way and start reducing a bunch of different challenges to their control, sensory issues, a bunch of different things. And then let's say the brother walks in and starts crying. Yeah, they're going to not like it. They may want him to stop. They may leave the room. They're not going to have a neurocrash because now they have enough. We haven't burned through all the internal resources. They've got something left now that they can actually process that with, even if they don't like it, right? And so that makes all the difference. So coming back to transitions, actually, a lot of the biggest reactions to transitions are the transition is just the almost like the proximate trigger, yes, But if we were dealing better with the other things, so we didn't burn through all their resources, then yeah, there might be things that are challenging about different transitions they're going through. Absolutely. But it doesn't then necessarily have to trigger something really explosive, any kind of neurocrash, because they have enough now internal resources to handle that. And they have enough trust of the people around them who are trying to help them handle that. And they have, right. So there's all these different things. It's not just one thing. Actually, one of the things I say a lot, I'm going to talk about this at the conference, is that it's not one thing, it's all the things. Everyone's trying to look for the thing, the trigger. What's the thing? And then we get rid of that. But if you get rid of that, there's going to be another trigger later, because it's not just the one thing. Everything's building up to shift our loved ones into fight or flight survival mode. Right. So if we lower everything so that they're not in fight or flight survival mode and they can feel, like I said at the beginning, a real sense of safety. Dr. Stephen Porges, a guy who I love, this guy, I've studied him, I use him in my work. He talks about this idea that he has this one quote that's so good. A feeling of safety, he calls it a neuroception of safety, like a deep brain perception of safety, isn't some nice thing that you should have so that the therapy can work, right? It's the safety is the therapy. It is the treatment. By itself, it has healing properties. I'm not saying it solves everything, but it's a key part of the healing process. So if they're feeling safe, and I'm not talking about if they are safe, we know they are, if we're with our loved one, we know they are safe according to our assessment, but they're not feeling safe, then yes, a transition is going to be super hard if they're not feeling safe. Absolutely. They're going to have big reactions to it. But if we can help them feel safe and not be in fight or flight, then a transition, even if challenging, is not going to have that same unsafe feeling. They're still going to have internal resources left, and then they can actually do the transition, learn from the transition, even grow the transition. So there's some moving parts here, but I think there's like a bigger picture to see about coming at it from the inside and not the outside, about really understanding that when something does happen, explosive behavior or a meltdown, it's a neurocrash and not some chosen thing or a temper tantrum or being stubborn. That there's a lot we can do, that these are not inevitable, these are preventable. And that underneath it all, if we can really create a neuroception of safety, a real perception on the part of the person on the spectrum of safety, then we're going to really mitigate a lot of what we would consider explosive behaviors. And on top of that, and gets into my breakout session when I talk about unleashing the social brain. On top of that, if we do want to unleash the social brain so that our loved ones can feel comfortable communicating, reaching out, connecting, learning new things, we still need safety for that too. And I'll just say real quickly, in that session, I'm going to talk about what I call the 5 autism love languages. These are something that my colleague Kate and I developed around this. And then secondly, the 3 main neurostates that our loved one on the spectrums are in. They're in only one of the 3 at a time, but there's 3 that they can be in. And it's so important to be able to identify which one they're in at the moment, because most of the difficulty happens when we're treating them like they're in one neurostate when they're actually in another. And one of the biggest mistakes I see is that people are dealing with our children and adults on the spectrum as if they're in a regulated neurostate when they're actually in either a dysregulated neurostate or maybe a third one called a regulating neurostate, meaning they're actually in the middle of regulating themselves. And if they're in either of those two, and we're trying to engage them, teach them, get them to do this, it's not going to lead to good stuff. So oftentimes we end up treating them like they're in a regulated, comfortable, safe feeling and able to reach out space, when they're actually not in that space at that moment. They will be in that space. Doesn't mean they can't be in that space, but they might not be there at 2 in the afternoon. They might not be there until 3:45 in the afternoon. So if you try at 2 o'clock to try and get them to, either be social or learn or do X or have a transition, whatever they're doing, that's going to either lead to a neurocrash or just more resistance and withdrawal. So we're going to get into that in the breakout session.
Wow, if this hasn't piqued everyone's interest and gets them to this conference, then I don't know what will. So I just want to thank you so much for giving us a quick overview. And I know there's so much more. I cannot wait to see you and hear from you even more, delving into all of this at the conference. So if you have not registered, go ahead and do that today. As soon as you see this, go on. I'll put all the information about how to register for the conference in with this video. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Really appreciate that.